It's been a couple of weeks since we left off with Daniel 5, and it's we're going to do Daniel 6 here. We're going to be in Daniel 6 if you want to start going there. Right in the middle of the Bible is Psalms, and you go over past Proverbs and Jeremiah and Isaiah, and you'll wind up with Daniel after Ezekiel. And so Daniel 6 is where we're going to be, but the reason I haven't been with you all in a couple of weeks is because just before I made the last video 2.5 weeks ago, Shannon my wife had a little bit of an accident, actually a lot of bit of an accident with my son. The short story is that he was coming off the bed, stomach first, and feet, his feet were up somehow, and she was bending over to pick up a sock or something off the floor, and his heel landed in her left eye, and it did a lot of damage. And so we've been it's kind of been a whirlwind. We just thought it was an ER trip, and well, that's going to be a painful shiner for a little while. And it turns out there's something called an orbital blowout fracture. I've learned new vocabulary. I knew all three of those words, but I didn't know they went together in a medical way. But you can Google orbital blowout fracture, and that's what she had. And delicate surgery with two surgeons at the same time and all of that yesterday. So we've been, of course, and this is a Bible lesson, she is my primary ministry. She is, if you're married, that's what it is. It says in Ephesians 5 that the husband is supposed to love your wife the way that Christ loves the church. Completely sacrifice all the good stuff that you have access to make sure that your bride gets to where she needs to go. And there's nothing more primary than that. Christ didn't die. How do you know it's primary? Because Christ didn't die and was resurrected for any other reason in existence ever. He hasn't done it again. He hasn't. That's how you know it's primary. And it's also reflected in the wife's role, actually, in the 10 Commandments. You all know the 10 Commandments, right? Even if you're not in the Bible a lot, you have, thou shalt have no other gods. In Exodus 20, there's a listing of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? Well, and that's not the church, that's to Israel in the Old Testament, but it's a moral command. We're still not supposed to be idolatrous in any way. We're supposed to be laser focused on pleasing God through our whole lives. And so that's the first commandment in an umbrella way that covers the others, and plus the first in the list. And for the New Testament church as well as Old Testament Israel, no other gods. Laser focused on pleasing me all through life, rewarded in heaven, sacrificing now, joyful, mingled with sorrow here, and then the sorrow wiped away every tear, right? In Revelation. So from Genesis and Exodus all the way to Revelation. And so the wife's role, just like the New Testament church, she's supposed to love her husband the way the church is supposed to love Christ back. So anyway, husband and wife, there's 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, 3 minutes of premarital counseling, if you haven't gone through that. But it's the framework for all the rest of it. And so I took a break from this and just about everything else, and we thought it was just going to be doctor visits, and with each doctor visit it got a little more serious, ophthalmologists and ear, nose, throat, and all that stuff. So Shannon is suffering well, and she's got the surgery went fine, and she did wonderfully. She's married to me, so she tolerates pain well, and she does it joyfully. But she, in all seriousness, knows that she really does. She's pumped full of antibiotics and painkillers for the next 3 or 4 or 5 days. A lot of swelling. We would appreciate your prayers. A lot of swelling, a lot of blood, a lot of a lot of pain, as it heals, and that's a picture too. I mean, healing, the way the Lord heals, He's faithful and just to finish the good work He starts. And as He heals, that's Jehovah. He says He's a lot of things. Jehovah Jireh is the Lord who provides. Jehovah Rapha is the Lord. It says in the Old Testament, the Lord who heals. And so He's healing our physical body, but He's healing all of us of our SIN virus, the fatal disease that all of us have, that we're infected with sin, and that if we turn and repent, and He rewires our heart to love Him, so, and then redirects our lives. And He did that with Daniel. So I'm going to end. This is going to be my the bookmark for this. And I hate, believe me, I hate to do this in Daniel 6. Because boy, Daniel 7 and 2 are linked together, and then 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Those are some of the most amazing chapters about the past and the present, and it frames much of all of the rest of the Bible. And so, and we're living in Daniel 12 4 times. You can go look that up. 2,600 years ago, Daniel, who, information moved at the speed of horseback and wind, sails, and on ships. And it says knowledge will increase exponentially, and people will run to and fro across the face of the planet. They weren't doing that back then, and he couldn't even imagine it, I'm sure. But at the time of the end, that's what's going to be happening, and we do all that right now. So there's a lot of amazing things between Daniel 6 and Daniel 12. But I wanted to point out in Daniel 6:10, it's actually, I wanted to end just on that note. And by the way, if I don't want to put all this out there with my cell number and all that stuff, but we send out, I'm a supported missionary. Shannon and I and my son, we're supported missionaries here in Pennsylvania. And if you want to keep up with us, you're welcome to do that. I send out updates every once in a while by email. And if you want to be added to that email list, all you got to do is send me a quick email and just say, please add me to the list. And it says, so my email address is Gmail, and it's teaching something good. No dashes or dots or capital letters or anything like that. Just those 3 words put together, teaching something good at gmail.com. And I'll add you to the list, and you'll get them from now on. So I'm going to send out an update on Shannon a little bit later today. So I'll give it a few hours, and if anybody wants to be added, you can. But I want to leave you with this. We'll leave this YouTube channel up for now, and just leave it where it's at, and bookmark it, and we'll come back and tackle some more later, okay? But as the Lord leads. But in Daniel 6:10, he's been set up. Daniel has been set up, and he's been betrayed by people who should be supporting him and loyal to him, and they scheme and they lie, and they thought it was important enough to lie to their king. And you can read the rest of Daniel 6 past verse 10. I'm just going to look at one verse with you. The vitamin is verse 10, but they got it in the end, and it's sad. It's their whole families. When somebody sins, it affects their whole families. And this is the Daniel in the lion's den. They lie. Daniel winds up in the lion's den, and you can read about all that. You probably know how that turns out. But the king turns around and puts the offenders and their wives and their children and when somebody sins, you don't suffer alone. You visit your suffering on other people. And so it's one other reason just not to sin. But the most important reason is not to grieve the heart of the Lord, which is what the New Testament talks about, grieving the Holy Spirit. Don't do that. But in chapter 6, verse 10, while they were deceiving the king, and while they were betraying Daniel, it says in chapter 6, verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, and that was the law that they tricked the king into signing, Daniel's enemies tricked the king into signing, saying no one could pray to another god except for the king. And I mean, that that's or on pain of death, and look how Daniel responds. And I thought this is in this coronavirus time and all of that. This is a good lesson. It says in his upper room, he went home in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God. And this last phrase is what I want to point out to you, as was his custom since early days. See, he continued. I mean, this was his daily routine. He prayed. I mean, as busy as Daniel was running a whole government for the most part. I mean, he had the equivalent. He was the equivalent of the vice president of the United States. He busy man, a lot of things going on, but he took time in the morning, in the middle, at lunch, and at night to pray. And so you can't be too busy to pray. We always make time, that. We always make time for what's really important to us. And it says, as was his custom since early days. And I love that because he decides to not buck the government. He wasn't, there's a lot of talk these days about, I'm gonna, not follow this government because it's not following the Constitution. Well, yeah, the Constitution is a higher authority than the temporary elected officials, but when the Bible talks about in Romans 13 and 1 Timothy 2, we're praying for individuals in that time and place. Esther 4:14 it's a succinct description of a concept that's true throughout history and humanity, that the Lord puts us where we are. It says it in Acts 17:2, for such a time as this. Have you heard that? For such a time as this, Esther 4:14. And that individual, whether they're pleasing God or not with their actions, they are doing the Lord's overall will. And that's not to say that they're not sinning. The Lord's, what he wants to happen is not going to be stopped by anybody of any party of any nation. And no matter how long they're in power or how bad they are. And I think a lot of people watching this probably know that. But Daniel is special here because what he's defying, and he brings on pain of death. You notice he doesn't fight the penalty, number one. He doesn't fight the penalty. He's not fighting for his rights. He simply does what he's always done. And if what you've always done just pleases the Lord, then you're okay. But see, what he's always done has not been, we're talking about, churches reopening, and I'm not getting into all of that conversation. There's a lot of different contexts, and there's no one size fits all with that. You have to depend on the wisdom of God and a lot of different passages and that kind of thing. But I got to tell you that Daniel, what he's doing here, we can still please God without what? Gathering for a short amount of time when the whole country's upside down in a lot of the world. But you can't stop praying. See, Daniel wasn't fighting for his rights or any of that kind of stuff. And you see that in Daniel 1:8. He was ordered to eat stuff that the Jewish law at the time was saying you can't do. And he said, well, I don't want to do that. But he said, but I do want to follow what you want me to do. Can I do this instead, this little modification? And we ought to be able to compromise everything but what we can't compromise. I can do anything but sin. And it's sin to not be attached to praying unceasingly, is what the New Testament says. So anyway, we're going to be praying unceasingly. Send me an email if you'd like to be added to our update list about Shannon's surgery and our ministry and all that fun stuff. And we'd love to keep in touch with you. Okay? And we'll bookmark here. Read the rest of Daniel on your own and feed yourself. Remember, we're going to stop where we started. Jeremiah 15:16, eating the word. Okay? Bye-bye.